Welcome back to Active Ingredients, the show that unpacks what it really takes to lead, grow, and stay human in the world of life sciences. Today's guest is Jesse Sibarium, a man who's traversed both the supply chain and commercial worlds, whose leadership journey stretches from Manhattan to Moldova, and then across nearly every market condition imaginable in blue chips and startups. But Jesse's story isn't about job titles or box ticking. It's about creating, as he says, leadership luck. It's about cultural immersion and leaning into an unpredictable journey that shapes the way we lead. Jesse brings credibility through lived experience, not just theory. We're going to explore global adaptability, decision-making under pressure, and what it really takes to lead with curiosity and courage. Jesse, welcome to Active Ingredients.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, that was quite an introduction. This is an episode I've been looking forward to. There's not many New Yorkers that have left and lived the life that you have, so I'm super excited for this discussion.
I'm curious to see where it goes as well.
Perfect. So I always kick off these podcasts, though, in the same way. I like to ask the question, what do you think are the three key active ingredients that make a successful leader, and why?
Good question. Active ingredients. Very, very good question. So one thing I would say is curiosity, inner drive, desire to learn. Every leader has to have that to a certain extent. I think about this quote from the former president, John F. Kennedy. He said, some people see things as they are and ask why. Some people dream things that never were and ask why not. So I think every leader has to have a little bit of that in them.
Love it.
The second one, and this is probably the most important thing, is picking the people around you. It is incredibly important personally. It is equally as important professionally. You've got to find the right people, your clique, your set, who can help you. They will not be afraid to kick you in the butt if you need a kick in the butt, but they will be with you on the journey. They will be with you in the war and all the battles that go along with it. You need a mix of different skills. You need a mix of different personalities, nationalities. You need everything in there. But that team is so crucial because, you may have to create a strategy. You may be inheriting a strategy. But strategy without execution is an illusion. That's from Thomas Edison. But, and it's that team that is going to help you execute. And then the third ingredient is really, it's grit, it's resilience. It's what do you do when the beautiful plans that you've made just can't be realized for whatever reason. And this, one more quote, hopefully the last one, I think of fellow New Yorker Iron Mike Tyson. He said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that's something all my teams have heard me say forever, ad nauseum, because you can have the greatest thing on paper. You could have everything lined up and it looks beautiful, the best PowerPoints, the best numbers. But something can happen when you least expect it. And everything can go pear-shaped. So you just need to be prepared. You need that grit. You need that resilience. So yeah, I don't know if those were actual ingredients or multiple ingredients, but those would be kind of my three sections of ingredients. Let's call it that.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, even on your LinkedIn, grit and gumption is what got us here. I love that. That's on your strap headline of your LinkedIn profile. But I think these are absolutely fantastic. Curiosity, inner drive, willing to learn, picking the people around you personally and professionally. I remember reading something about, we are the sum of the 5 people that we spend the most time with, right?
Absolutely. We are. So, and those 5 people are always going to change. Probably 1 or 2 of them will stay the same, but the other 3, will come in and out depending on situations. So that is absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that and felt that myself. Sometimes, earlier on in my career, if I was joining a team that maybe had a bit of a negative spin, it was almost like my job to go in. I felt like to try and bring some positivity to it. And I felt like I could change some of the hearts and minds of people. Or if not, it was time to, you either change the person, or as somebody said to me once, you change the person. You get somebody else in that actually will bring up to the standards that you need. But I was going to say grit and resilience. I think from a Mike Tyson quote, that one's absolutely brilliant. And I think you've got lots of stories to tell us about grit and resilience, and how you have made some really bold choices in your life and career to get you where you are. But I think a good moment now would be maybe for us to have a talk about your early years and how that actually might have created some direction posts or some signs for your later career and the moves that you've made. So do you want to give the listeners just a bit of an overview of maybe what you were like at school, college, university, and how we got to this point?
Um, Gosh, don't know how far back to go. So I'm a kid from kind of I think you'd call it council housing in British English in New York City. Never could have imagined living in Europe, being in this industry. Didn't even know probably what Europe was or what this industry was in my early years. I could barely see north of Central Park growing up. So, things just kind of happened. It was a very New York lifestyle going to schools. I think in terms of school, one of the earliest situations for me that was critical and in thinking about this podcast, it became even more important was my high school experience. So I went to what you would probably call the fame school from the movie and the TV show. So I went to that high school and I was there for voice, for singing. And there was a lesson on the very first day of school. I'll never forget it. If you don't mind me telling this story, because it's relevant for me.
Yeah, go for it.
We had this old voice teacher, Mrs. X. She was about 1.5 meters tall, old. We go into this class. It was on the fourth or fifth floor of the building. First day of high school. First day of voice class. She says, "Okay, all of you, run down the stairs right now to the bottom." So we're all, looking at each other. We don't even know each other. So we go out, we run down to the bottom. And now she leans over. She could barely even lean over the rail because she's so short. And she says, "Now run up the stairs." And okay, so we run back up the stairs. We're in the class. We're like panting, we can't breathe. First day of class, so we're all wearing our nicest clothing. And she says, "Okay, Sonia, sing the Star Spangled Banner." And she's like, "What?" And she says, "Oh, say, can you see?" And she can barely breathe. And the teacher, Mrs. X, says, "That's terrible. Next, Jesse, you sing it." And I'm like, "Oh, say, I can't do it." And she does this a few times. None of us can do it. And she says, "This is what you need to remember. Nobody cares what's going on in your personal life. Nobody cares that you ripped your pants. Nobody cares that whatever. You are here for a show. People have paid money. They've paid money for a ticket. They came to see a performance. You need to give them a performance. Nobody cares that you're out of breath. Nobody cares that you forgot the words. This is crucial. You need to just perform." And that is a lesson that I have taken forward from high school through my professional career and whatever, industries I was in. And it's still relevant to today. People will ask you, "How are you doing?" Very few actually genuinely want to know how you're doing. People have paid for a show. You need to give them that performance.
Love that. Wow. And that, normally I do quite a lot of research into our guests. Jesse, I didn't have you down as a junior singer.
Well, it's been a
Is
long
this
time. It's been a long time.
at the end of the episode, we'll get you to sing Star Spangled Banner?
Better to do karaoke afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, wow. So, I mean, that's also quite intense, isn't it? That's quite a intense lesson
It was very
of,
intense, and it was right on the first day. So that kind of set the tone for the rest of our high school years. Now,
yeah.
obviously, I didn't pursue music after high school, but those lessons, and there were many more like that, they have kind of followed through. And I think anyone who studied in the arts at a high level will also have those types of lessons. It's about, again, that was kind of the first lesson in grit and resilience to a certain extent.
And in a drive, I'd imagine, trying to maybe prove the teacher that you could do what was
Absolutely.
being asked.
Absolutely. One of the first things we all learned was breath control.
Yeah, love it. So you're within a different kind of education system, okay, for high school
Hmm.
with than some of the other guests that I've spoken to. How did the globalization of a New Yorker start to kind of, when did those seeds start to sow? When did you actually think, you know, I'm going to be moving away from New York and I'm going to be taking on a new challenge in Moldova?
Well, I had inklings of it very early on. Also, while I was just at university or just starting university, because I fell in love with a girl from Liverpool. And so it opened up my mind. And I started to meet other people from Europe in particular, working at a summer camp in New York. And it really opened up my mind to a life outside of the Isle of Manhattan. And of course, I had traveled a little bit, but very little. But, meeting other international people, meeting people who spoke the same maternal language that I spoke, but just in a very different way, really enticed me. And I was hungry to learn more. I was hungry to experience more. So I strongly suspected that I was going to find my way to Europe. I had no idea how. I didn't know anybody in Europe other than these people I had met. But I really began to sense very early on that I was going to have some kind of international career, whatever it was going to be.
Love that. And there's that curiosity coming in.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And so the path to Moldova, there were a lot of internships in between there. I had interned in Canada for a summer. I had interned in France for 2 summers. I had made friends with a couple of folks in Europe and traveled a bit. But having I really couldn't find the job that I wanted in New York. I wasn't even sure exactly what the job was that I wanted in New York. I
But you knew
wanted,
it wasn't there.
I knew it wasn't there, and I probably, after one night, this was I've told my kids this story a million times. There was one night when I was still getting my master's degree that I sent out 452 resumes, CVs, cover letters, all across the United States and Canada. And I probably got about 8 to 10 responses, 9 of them negative, and then one of them asking for more information. And that lesson also, made me think, okay, I'm not doing something right. I've got to try something different. I wanted to eventually get to Europe, as I mentioned before, or at least go international. And I had to think of a way to do it. And there was a program, there still is a program in the United States called the Peace Corps. And usually it's for English teachers teaching English to kids all over the world, usually in lesser developed countries. Um, they do a lot of agricultural programs and social programs. But in the 90s, the Soviet Union had just imploded. You had all of these different countries, and there was a new channel for a business program for small business development. And I saw this as an opportunity, even though I had incredibly limited business experience. I had the gumption of a New Yorker to think I could change the world. And I had this optimism of an American that, we could rise up together and all that kind of stuff. So I applied for the program and eventually got in to a country called the Republic of Moldova. And Of course, I had never heard of Moldova before. I think it was a theoretical kingdom on the TV show Dynasty, or Dynasty, as you would say, and knew nothing about it. But I thought if I could somehow make it in a country that I and no one else has ever heard of before, I could somehow work my way west and end up in Western Europe. And it sounds crazy, but the plan actually worked. I'm still not entirely sure how it worked, but it actually did work in the end. So
Yeah.
I made it to Moldova, and it was the experience of a lifetime. But it
But
was
if you, I was going to say, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, right? Frank Sinatra style. Just who
that's
thought it would have been Moldova?
Tom. I'm telling you, I thought of that line many times when I was shivering in my apartment, developing frostbite when it was -20 outside and -10 inside my apartment. I thought there is no way I can quit, because if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere. And I was just in Moldova 2 weeks ago with my partner, and to show her for the first time and to celebrate my 30-year anniversary of going to the country, of arriving in the country. And the family that we were staying with, these dear old friends of mine, they also reminded me of that story of how I was shivering. They were so worried that I was gonna, wake up frozen one day, and just
It's
hilarious.
it's a wild story because when you and I have spoken about this before, you said that there was definitely a where you had like no language skills, no local network. You called it opportunity spotting. So you were kind of in this new zone. Let's start here. How do I build these foundational steps of, cultural understanding? Can we talk a bit more about that?
Sure. So when I arrived, I was the youngest person in my kind of business cohort. Everyone else was a bit older. They had had some legitimate business experience, and I didn't have that. I had had experiences. I had had lots of different jobs in different places, but what could I possibly share to this population that up until 10 seconds ago thought we were the biggest enemies of theirs in the world? Because the Soviet Union was against the US was against the Soviet Union. Now it's an independent country. These poor guys go from being part of the largest country in the world to being, a tiny, impoverished country, the poorest in Europe. But that lack of, it took a while to overcome the trust barrier and the suspicion barrier. And so without any marketable skills that I could really support these people with in the area where I was, I had to think, how do I do it? And the one thing that I thought of was, if I could quickly learn this language and learn this culture, I could bypass translators and I could go directly to the source. I could go directly to the people and speak to them directly. And that strategy worked out, because all of a sudden I was granted access in, the highest places in the country. And so I was actually able to start things that many of my more experienced peers couldn't start, because they didn't have this access. They either never took the time, or they just couldn't linguistically make that leap to learn this language fluently, quickly, to begin those relationships. And it paid off in spades in the end. It was a calculated risk, but I took it, and I think a lot of people benefited from it in the end.
And was this the moment where you first felt like a leader?
It wasn't the first moment I felt like a leader, but I realized that maybe I could achieve some things that even I wasn't aware of before. I had had leadership opportunities before, and I can elaborate on those. But that experience, doing it in a different language, in a different culture, not knowing anyone, that was incredibly special, and that also kind of set the course for my professional career that I'm still benefiting from today.
So the language and cultural immersion that you were able to build Would you say that that has been almost like a fast track for leadership credibility?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Skills can be taught. You can learn to do things. Nobody wakes up when they're a kid and says they want to be a biotech executive. Nobody knows what that is or how to achieve that. So you can learn those things along the way, but there are some things that are innate. Communication, uh, curiosity, knowledge. How do you communicate with people? Is there a desire to communicate with people? And that is universal. And, sharing a meal with people at a table, drinking their homemade local wine, that can break down barriers beyond any commercial terms in a term sheet, for
Yeah.
example.
And also can create some of the best hangovers of your entire life, I'd imagine.
Depending on how much you drink, yes.
Yes. So, because what has then been really interesting, and we'll just have a quick look through your career in Europe now before we start to talk about some of the other topics. But you've then been able to go from Moldova to Romania
Mhm,
to the Netherlands to
mhm.
Switzerland to, I think even France was thrown in there for a little bit. You know, each move, would you say it's kind of built more layers on top of this foundation that you built in Moldova?
Absolutely. And I'm sure you will not speak with many people who say their foundation was in Moldova. But yes, it's true. Each move, laid the groundwork for the next move. If I hadn't have had the opportunity in Moldova to create a an organic bio walnut and dried fruit business with my colleagues, I would have never had the opportunity to be involved in privatizing former state-owned dairy processing plants in Moldova, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. If I hadn't have had that experience, I wouldn't have been at a trade show in Romania with our products where I was spotted by the VP of International for a large US agribusiness conglomerate who said, "This is hilarious. This kid from New York who speaks this language, with these products, we want this guy heading up our affiliate in Romania." If I hadn't had that experience and learning about how products move, I wouldn't have had an experience eventually moving into pharmaceutical logistics, which is ironically very similar to the logistics in the cold chain, dairy processing chain. Um, if I hadn't have had the opportunity in the Netherlands with pharmaceutical logistics, I would have never come originally into the industry via Amgen as their, head of international operations. And then just things took off from there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love this story. I mean, I'm a curious person as well, but my curiosity has never led me on a international path like this. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic to listen to. Some people aspire to get to New York. Like that's the pinnacle for some people's career is to go and work there. For you, it's like, well, I was there. Now I want to go to all of these other crazy places and learn, see what life's got in store.
Look, Tom, I admit it. I live the American dream. I am living the American dream. I'm just living it outside of America. I'm living it in Europe. And I
Love it.
needed to come to Europe to live the American dream. As strange as that sounds.
Yeah. And what you've said there is you really eloquently put all of these nice touches throughout your career of if I didn't do this, I wouldn't have got this. And if I didn't work in this place, in this meeting, I wouldn't have been spotted. We've spoken about leadership luck, being in the right place at the right time and willing to do what others don't want to. Can we explain a little bit more? Can we open up that box a little bit?
Yeah, that's tricky. And as you said, not a lot of people or not enough people are as curious to do these things. You have to put yourself in situations, sometimes uncomfortable situations, as a way to try to create your own luck. Very few people are in the right place at the right time. It happens. And sometimes we get lucky. But sometimes we have to go to Moldova to get to Switzerland. Sometimes you've got to go around the process. Um, and one thing in business as well is we don't talk enough about luck. And sometimes luck is crucial. And again, going back to having the best laid out plans, you can have great plans. But if the right person doesn't see it, if we have the right therapy, we had just in my most recent position at PTC Therapeutics, we had an incredible life-changing gene therapy. It was incredible, but it was so expensive that very few people or very few countries or insurance companies were willing to pay for it. And we had to make the effort to find these patients because the indication was so rare. So you've got to make the extra effort sometimes. You've got to work really hard to make things easy.
Love that. Yeah, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Somebody once said to me, that was one of those things that resonated in my brain. So we've spoken about you needing empathy and cultural fluency, you called it, to create some of that luck as well. So you were building a lot of that from taking these opportunities and moving through these different markets. How did you, as a leader, how did you start to understand that was your superpower, that empathy and cultural understanding? Did that start to unravel as you were just like plopped into these new roles, new locations, and just taking the challenge on?
I think it evolved over time. I understood that I had something special in Moldova and that I was able to parlay that into Romania, for a number of years. But I think when I moved to the Netherlands and I started working with a lot of Brits, a lot of Dutch, a lot of Belgians in particular, it showed that I could take that same formula, those same active ingredients, as you might call them, and really parlay them into a new environment, a new industry, new geography, and that it was also very, very welcome. One example is I learned how to speak Dutch. And so first of all, the Dutch don't expect anyone to learn their language, especially Anglo-Saxons or, speakers of English as a native language. But I had something to prove. And that, by speaking Dutch, by being a New Yorker who spoke Dutch, that opened up, incredible possibilities. And even from a competitive advantage, if I was bidding on business with, another company that had the same skills, the same foundation, they could do the job just as well as we could. Sometimes it was that, being able to speak Dutch directly to some of the companies we were working with, that just, that sold the deal in the end. So I've always been increasingly cognizant of that. Don't underestimate those, what some people call soft skills, because for me, the soft skills are really the hard skills.
Yes, especially now.
Especially now.
As the world is changing, I'm totally with you there. So leadership luck can also come in different forms where, understanding that leadership is both human and unpredictable. It seems as though you've been able to immerse yourself locally to really be able to drive change, to create the right teams around you. Do you think that being able to adapt quickly has been one of those real superpowers?
Again, it's been the superpower because I have often, probably all the time, taken on jobs that I was never really fully qualified for. Let's be honest about it. So I was stepping into different roles in different places, in different cultures, with different people, in different industries. And I always had to figure out the fastest paths to learning what this new challenge is. And a lot of it came through the cultural understanding, finding these connections. And as I said before, skills can be taught. You can learn how to do anything. When I was in Moldova, I didn't know how to commercialize a drug across Europe. Uh, but these are things you learn. Different experiences, one after the other can lead up to that. But again, without that cultural understanding and having the teams around you, building the teams, very diverse teams around you, it's almost impossible to succeed.
Yeah, because I've got here, so credibility through lived experience in differing environments. It's not just a resume. You've built trust across borders, languages through success and failures. For our listeners, let's go to that first role within logistics. So you're working in like a commercial role within the logistics world. Is that right?
That's true. Yes. I was a business development manager for Europe for an old British company called Excel, which was subsequently acquired by Deutsche Post, the parent company of DHL. And when I joined, I was one of about 4 or 5 business development managers. Definitely the odd one out. I didn't have the logistics pedigree that my peers did. I certainly didn't have the geographic pedigree that they had. And I had a great leader, fantastic leader, who saw the potential of somebody who had zero experience in a specific industry, didn't know anyone in the industry, but I had the right ingredients to make this work. And this guy took a chance on me, brought me in, and it worked out. It was incredible. So we were able to help a lot of different companies establish their initial operations in Europe, their logistics operations and supply chain hubs. And again, that opened up a lot of doors for me. It opened up a lot of new knowledge and experience for me as well. We did a lot of work in Spain and Belgium and France, the UK, a bit in Germany at the time, a lot in Italy. And those experiences, helped me move things forward to the point where several years later, a former customer of mine said he had changed companies, and he said, "Hey, I'm at this company called Amgen. We've got a position here that I think you'd be great for." And so by keeping those connections, by first demonstrating that you can learn, you can adapt, keeping those connections, keeping the communication channels open, some people would call it networking, but making sure people always remembered you. I was given this opportunity to submit my CV, and it changed my life. That's what brought my family and me to Switzerland ultimately.
And then you actually changed from a commercial role to a supply chain position. Is that right, within this Amgen move?
Yes. So I went from commercial roles with a supply chain vendor, to a pure supply chain role within Amgen. I was able to do it. It wasn't a natural fit. I was helping the company. I was part of a small group of people working on the company's international expansion. So it was a motley crew of about 5 different folks, and we all gelled. We had a commercial person. I was the supply chain person. We had a regulatory person. We had a medical person, and we basically were steering Amgen into expanding outside of Western Europe, which was kind of funny at the time because we were making decisions about which SKUs to register in different countries, how we would get the product there. But it wasn't the most natural fit for me because it was a very scientific, very, very serious position in that sense, very, very supply chain, as you might imagine. And I could do the job, but there were definitely others who could do it better. So the moment there was a reorganization and I had the opportunity to jump into a commercial role, I took it and didn't look back.
Yeah. And I think you said at the time that you moved into the supply chain role, you still tried to keep a commercial mindset in that position.
Yes. And that sometimes didn't always make me the most popular person within the supply chain part of the company, because they're really focused. They are specialists focusing on supply chain matters, and they're not necessarily thinking of the commercial side of the business. I always tried to keep that flexibility. I felt like I understood both sides, to the chagrin of some of my supply chain colleagues. But in the end, as I said, it all worked out. And the moment there was an opportunity, I was able to jump, and I was welcomed into the commercial part of the organization.
And leadership luck means that you're able to then go and move into this role that maybe not many other people were either interested in or qualified to do.
Exactly. There were a number of countries that didn't neatly fit into some of the newly reorganized regions. So we had at the time Croatia, Serbia, Israel, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. So I just called it Emerging Europe, and we just created a new region out of that.
And then this next kind of 2-3 years of your career was then a really good catalyst for you to really blossom in the commercial part of the life sciences world.
It was wonderful. At the time, we had 4 different products that we had the rights to in these countries. And so we had different launches at different times. So I got to learn, I went to dialysis centers in each of those countries on multiple occasions. We had, Aranesp, which was an EPO, which is what the cyclists like to use, or in the past, in the Tour de France. So seeing how our drugs could actually help people in different places, seeing the similarities and differences of dialysis centers all over that region, that emerging Europe region. We had, other drugs more, oncology. We had a drug for colorectal cancer, third line colorectal cancer. So, we were seeing, folks really at the end of the road. And, how do you get a drug that's not reimbursed into some of these markets, some of the poorest markets in the region? It was an incredible learning, but it also, again, showed that you cannot do this alone. You need to have a good team of people with you, and you need to have good local partners in the field as well, whether they're your own team or another company that's helping you do it. It's absolutely crucial, and it will never work if you don't have these ingredients with you.
Yeah. And what about those ingredients? So if you're looking at that moment or that catalyst in your career, when you now build teams, what are you looking for? What do you think the makeup of a good team is all about?
It's different. It depends on the geography. It depends on what you've got, what kind of drug you have for what disease area. Do you need to do a lot of disease awareness? Do you need to do a lot of patient identification? Are the patients already identified? So it really depends on understanding those basics. And then it's really finding somebody with, let's say, everyone has to have a base level of skills. And most people do at this level and in this industry. But this is where kind of the chemistry comes into play. How do I feel working with this person? How do they feel working with me and their peers? Can this person fit? I tell the story of we were looking for a head of marketing for my region, and we couldn't agree on the right person. But there was a guy who came through the interview process, and he was not the best for the role. This guy, French guy, 0 experience in the Middle East, didn't speak Arabic, but this guy was perfect to be the head of the Middle East for different reasons, because the needs in the region at that moment matched his skill set. And so it didn't matter that he didn't speak the language, that he had no experience in the region. I knew that if he could fit there, if he could do what I thought he could do, he can make this thing grow. And that's exactly what he did. So that's just an example of how I try to approach finding the right people for the right roles at the right times.
And what I love about that is we've talked about a lot of your, having the lived experience of this has been the catalyst for you to be able to make that decision. Somebody did that with you once. Somebody's noticed that you were that person that could do the job, even though you didn't have the skills, experience, or language.
Well, it was Anthony Mitchell at Excel. When he recruited me, I was the head of an affiliate of an American agribusiness in Romania. I was an American, had never worked for a publicly listed UK company, had never worked in logistics, but I got called one day and I was asked, do you know anything about pharmaceutical logistics? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. And that's kind of how it kicked off. And he once asked me, just before I got the go ahead, I think it was the second or the third interview, the final interview, he and I were sitting in a taxi together. And he said in his very heavy accent, which I will not try to imitate here, he said, "Why should I take a risk on a Yank living in Romania who knows nothing about our business?" It was a great question. I didn't know what to say. So the first thing I could think of was, because I've got personality. And then the next day I got the offer.
Love it. Love that. And then I like that there's a lot of things weaved from your past that then come back to the present. It's been a fascinating discussion so far. One thing that I think our listeners will be very interested in as well is you leave Amgen, okay, who I would say are almost at that point like big globalized, almost blue chip, maybe not that quite size, but big organization. You've then gone into different size organizations, again taking risks with a little bit of leadership luck, but you started to work in smaller founder-led type organizations. How did you go from an organization, I think the Amgen people used to say that they would like bleed blue, to then go and totally change and work in a totally different environment? How did you make that transition?
So the transition out of Amgen was, it was involuntary. Let's say that I was part of the largest rift that the company had in Europe at the time. I think the 20% or 25% of Amgen Europe was made redundant, and my role, my position, was being relocated to Istanbul. And I had a young family. I was not ready to build a pension in Turkish lira. So it was not going to work. So I was put on that list. And there were a number of us from Amgen who went to a new startup called Onyx. And this was what an experience. Tiny. Almost everyone on the management team, but two had come from Amgen, literally 5 meters away. And that was the experience, I think, for all of us involved. We still talk about it to this day, many of us, how that experience working in such a small startup where we were creating everything from scratch was amazing. And we've all been chasing after that ever since, all of us, wherever we've gone. And then, through some twists and turns, I ended up in a founder-led organization at PTC several years later, where the founder CEO, Stu Peltz, inspirational guy from head to toe, he had, obviously it was his baby. He had a lot of passion for it. He had a lot of concern for it, but he was also willing to take risks that I'm not sure a non-founder CEO would have done. One of them was making the case. I asked for a $2 million investment to create a fully fledged affiliate in the Russian Federation in 2019. And not many small to medium-sized publicly listed biotechs would have done that. A lot of companies have passed. Biojet passed. A lot of larger companies that could have easily set up their own shop passed. But because I felt like I knew how to do this and how to find the right people to do this, our CEO took the chance. He trusted me, and he, took the risk. And it's now, one the largest single component of PTC today in terms of revenue. So it was a great gamble. And again, I think it's the grit of a founder CEO to take those risks as well, which I really appreciate. And I'm attracted to that as well. It resonates highly with me.
Yeah, because a lot of there has been a lot of talent migration from, say, large pharma to smaller startup environments. What advice would you give those people to get into the slipstream of a smaller, more dynamic organization? What's worked best for you?
First, let me just say the larger organizations are great. They're like schools. They often have great benefits. You're learning different processes. You can get involved in different things. But when you go to a smaller organization, you've got to be willing to do a million different things. Only one of them will be listed in your job title. You've got to be prepared to do everything. You've got to be prepared to sometimes be a compliance person, be a medical person, be, a finance person, whether you want to or not, or whether you feel comfortable in that role or not. So you've got to be open to doing more things, being more hands-on, literally rolling up your sleeves and getting your fingernails dirty. It takes a lot of grit to be part of an organization that you are building versus one that you are stepping into. It's like with how there's a difference between moving into an apartment in a building versus building your house from scratch. And that's what a small organization can be like. So it's not for everyone. A lot of people, get nervous about a build like that, a new build, but I love it.
Yeah, you've spoken about walking into the space and experimenting within those smaller environments. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, sometimes you step into a role. You think you know what the role is, but it quickly changes. Remember, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So what do you do? How do you figure things out? You've got to experiment. You've got to take risks, and you absolutely have to fail. The fastest way to learn is failing. The main thing is make sure you fall forward and not backward, and you fail quickly, because the faster you fail, the faster everyone else is going to learn from the mistake and move forward. So I would always encourage my teams to fail. I just ask them, please do it fast. Please do it quickly.
And then back to your second active ingredient, and you've just mentioned it there. It's about picking the right people around you, especially in those smaller, more dynamic environments.
Absolutely. You need people who are willing to speak up, who are not shy, who have strong opinions, who are willing to take the risk of failure. I've never seen any situation where there is 100% success. It's statistically impossible, first of all. And second of all, it's not natural, and it's not. You need to make mistakes along the way. It makes you stronger. It makes the team stronger. It ultimately makes whatever organization you're working for stronger.
And more realistic.
Much more realistic.
Exactly. I mean, absolutely fantastic. We have covered so much ground today, from that kind of globalized American. There's not enough of you guys around. I loved how you said, I've got the gumption of a New Yorker and the ambition of somebody from the US, but just doing it in Europe. Fantastic line. I love the leadership luck. your credibility through lived experience, and now that kind of really tangible experience of, you know, differing size organizations and how you have been able to be successful in the frameworks that you put in place to do that. What I always ask as we kind of come to the end of the episode is more around like the future of leadership or the future of life sciences. Can we spend some time talking about that?
Gosh, the future. I think, and again, I'm just speaking for myself, I think it will become much more personalized. That will have an impact on cost. I think the pressure on costs will be going down. Will continue to push prices down. If you look at what's happening in Spain right now with their price transparency law, which may come into effect, it's on the cusp of coming into effect, which would mean that all the net prices are going to be made public. So usually all around Europe, it's like a car dealership. You've got the list price, and then you've got the actual price that an insurer or an individual or a hospital is going to pay. And there could be a big delta between those two prices. But Spain is threatening to publish what that price is. And if, the US moves forward with its most favored nation project of recognizing the lowest prices in wherever, there's a good chance that the lowest prices are going to be in Europe or in Spain, excuse me. And, that could have a huge impact where you've got, and this is another thing, where you'll have large chunks of regions, maybe some regions altogether, completely bypassed or put on the back shelf for not the first wave of a launch, not the second wave, but maybe the third or fourth waves of a launch, or no launch at all. There was a rumor that I heard just yesterday from, I won't say, one of my previous employers that has a potential blockbuster coming up, where they have already decided that they are probably not going to launch in Spain for different reasons, but it's because of that price transparency risk. And I see more of that happening. I think in terms of the types of teams that we build in the industry going forward, we need to have much more diverse teams, not only diverse in terms of nationalities and things like that, but diverse in terms of skills. We cannot have teams that are built by people who only make PowerPoint slides. And we can't have management by PowerPoint. I think that has kind of peaked, and we've got to move beyond that. We need to find people who can get things done and get things done quickly. And we also need to be really flexible on how we approach launches. First, there are a million different definitions of what a launch actually is, but there are certain patterns that people have done, companies have done, because it's what they did in the past and they think that it works. We need sometimes some fresh thinking that it makes actually more sense in many, many ways to launch in certain markets before we launch in other markets, even if historically we've always started in some of these markets. These are trends that I see moving forward. I think the Middle East is growing in importance and scale. And I think a lot of companies are going to be looking to, in some cases, bypass Europe or parts of Europe and go directly to the Middle East after the US. So I think we're on the cusp of a lot of change. And it's going to be exciting to see where things go from there.
Exciting, slightly worrying as well on the transparency piece. Sometimes the pharma industry has an external view of, transparency being an issue, which can work negatively in some parts of the press around large pharma, as they call it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out if blockbusters don't go to certain countries, because all of a sudden you'll see behind the curtain of the pricing. That could negatively affect the industry.
And ultimately, patients are going to suffer because then they won't have choice, they won't have product availability, and it's a worrying trend. I understand the theoretical logic behind it, but I don't think it serves anyone's purpose. We all know what the price of a car is, the list price. And again, if you paid 20 quid less than me, if you're happy with it and I'm happy with what I got, then that should be enough. We should leave it at that.
And what about the future of leadership? You spoke earlier about soft skills being more and more important. What do you think of the leaders of the future?
I think the leaders of the future will have more diverse backgrounds. I think the days of starting as a product rep and then going to a district manager and slowly working your way up like that, I understand that's how things were done. And most people in leadership positions followed that path to a certain extent. But I think we are becoming much more diverse. We are having many more experiences. And I think the market needs us to have these experiences. All business is international to a certain extent. Decisions are made locally. We need that level of local expertise. There's no question about it. But we need to find people who have had experience across multiple jurisdictions. On my teams, with the exception of the very niche country-specific role, I want all of my teams and all of the key people on my teams to be able to seamlessly move between geographies, between jurisdictions. I want someone who feels comfortable working in France, who can also feel comfortable working in Saudi Arabia, who can also feel comfortable working in Israel, who can also feel comfortable working in Germany. I think we need more of those people, and I think that's going to be a trend, and those types of leaders are really going to set themselves apart.
Yeah, and actually that has been one of the themes of all of the guests so far in Active Ingredients. Lots of different executives that I've spoken to, they have all had some kind of international move, or from one country to one side of the country to the other. But there's definitely a theme of that globalization. I think you then have deeper understanding of, a global business if you've actually had the, bravery to go and make an international move.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more.
And you, Jesse, definitely have had the bravery to do that. Some unbelievable moves, an unbelievably exciting career. I've really enjoyed today's conversation. It has been filled with tons of value, loads of cool frameworks, loads of great, I especially like the Mike Tyson quote, loads of great quotes as well. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I think the guests are going to have. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed today's discussion.
No, I've enjoyed it as well. So thanks for making the time and for listening and letting me take a walk, through my lifetime up until this point. I've really appreciated it.
Thank you.